2 Corinthians 2, 1-10. So I made up my mind not to make you another painful visit. For if I cause you pain, who is there to make me glad but the one who I have pained? And I wrote as I did, so that when I came, I might not suffer pain from those who should have made me rejoice. For I am confident about all of you, that my joy would be the joy of all of you. For I wrote you out of much distress and anguish of heart, and with many tears, not to cause you pain, but to let you know the abundant love that I have for you. But if anyone has caused pain, he has caused it not to me, but to some extent, not to exaggerate it, to all of you. This punishment by the majority is enough for such a person. So now, instead, you should forgive and console him, so that he may not be overwhelmed by excessive sorrow. So I urge you to reaffirm your love for him. I wrote for this reason, to test you and to know whether you are obedient in everything. Anyone whom you forgive, I also forgive. What I have forgiven, if I have forgiven anything, has been for your sake in the presence of Christ.
Let's begin with prayer. Holy One, be with us now in this moment as we seek to be better stewards of your life-giving grace. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Last week, we began a new series on 2 Corinthians. Pastor Stacy walked us through the circumstances that led to Paul's fourth letter to the people of Corinth and the contentious relationship that he had with them. You see, at the time that Paul wrote 1 Corinthians, he intended to return to Corinth after staying in Ephesus until Pentecost and then visiting Macedonia. In the meantime, he sent Timothy to visit the Corinthians on his behalf. Timothy found the tension between Paul and the Christians at Corinth to have escalated due to the arrival of opponents of Paul from outside Corinth. In response, Paul set out for Corinth immediately for what became a quote-unquote painful visit, during which Paul's authority and gospel were severely called into question by the church. Paul himself was opposed and offended by one of its leaders. He left Corinth under attack, determined not to make another such painful visit to the Corinthians. Instead, he sent Titus to them with a tearful letter of rebuke and a warning as an attempt to win them back.
Incidental. The problem exists because white people think they're better than black people, and they want to oppress us, and they want us to allow ourselves to be oppressed.
This is the I agree with you perfectly. This is the basic problem.
Then what do you
that white people think they're better than others?
I can't solve the problem. You guys pull the strings that close schools. You guys draw the boundaries that keep our kids restricted to the ghetto. You guys write up the restrictive covenants that keep us out of houses. So it's up to you to talk to your brothers and your sisters and persuade them that they have a responsibility. We've assumed ours for over 400 years, and we're tired of this kind of stuff now. We're not going to suffer patiently anymore. No more turning the other cheek. No more blessing our enemies. No more praying for those who despitefully use us. We're going to show you that we've learned the lesson lessons you've taught us. We've studied your history, and you did not take over this country by singing "We Shall Overcome." You did not gain control of the world like you have it now by dealing fairly with a man and keeping your word. You're treaty breakers, you're liars, you're thieves, you rape entire continents and races of people. Then you wonder why these very people don't have any confidence or trust in you. Your religion means nothing. Your law is a farce, and we see it every day. You demonstrated it in Alabama, and I can say you because you're part of the whole system. You profit from it. In fact, you make your living from it. You couldn't walk around and talk to people, stand up in your pulpit on Sunday and preach nice little songs and say, now we're going to give thanks to the Lord for he is good and old Jesus be among us. As far as we're concerned, your Jesus is contaminated, just like everything else you tried to force upon us is contaminated.
Well,
so you can have him. And here's what I'll say. I wish you would follow Jesus like we followed him. Because if you did that, then we'd be in charge tomorrow. I think the problem is so bad that we can have no understanding at all.
You think it's gotten to the point where there can never be that reconciliation?
No. You talk about justice, and it means one thing to you, and we talk about it and it means something else to us. And it'll always be that way. And I'd like you to know I have a terrible feeling against preachers, because I think you guys are the ones who are largely responsible for the problem in the first place. And you can accept it or not any way you choose. And for you, this may be an excursion, you know, across the line.
What about the person that wants to listen? I genuinely feel that I want to listen.
Well, if you listen and try to do something, you get kicked out of your church. See, that's the way your people are.
In 1961, JFK became the youngest person to ever serve as President of the United States. That Camelot era, as it would be known, was a time for hope and optimism for many. The average gas price was 31 cents per gallon. The first American was sent into outer space. Television shows such as Leave It to Beaver and The Andy Griffith Show told the story of the idealism of the American dream. But those idyllic images were far from the reality for many people of color, especially in the Deep South. Jim Crow laws kept people of color from participating in that American dream through segregation and lynching. These practices had been outlawed by the Supreme Court twice, once in 1946 and again in 1960. But many white Southerners followed their own set of rules. During those hate-filled and terrifying times in the South and other parts of the country, a fearless and determined group of Americans, men and women, black and white, many of them still in college at the time, joined together to fight against racial injustice in our country. 13 courageous freedom riders would risk their lives to board buses in Washington, D.C. and head south, directly and deliberately into segregation and the KKK. The plan was to buy tickets on interstate buses for a 2-week journey that would end in New Orleans. Along the way, the riders would test federal laws that prohibited segregation by sitting in the front of buses and sitting in waiting rooms designated whites only and colored. Among these 13 American heroes were the Reverend C.T. Vivian and the 21-year-old man who would go on to become Congressman John Lewis, both of whom died on Friday evening.
I mean, I'm not going to say because some people in the church, you know, said, well, I'll leave. I'm not going to condemn the whole church. I said, well, the persons who did it are rotten. You know, I'm not going to hide the fact that I think, you know, they're wrong. And, well, they don't belong in, no, I'm not going to say they don't belong in a church, because the church is a place to
join a
learn.
church where you know you were upsetting the people because of your presence there?
Please, that's a difficult question.
Religious. I don't think they're Christians at all, because you're supposed to love your fellow man if you're not doing it.
I do think the church does have a real responsibility to people like this, because I read someplace where a church isn't really a show place for saints, it's a hospital for sinners. And so if a person hates another person, where is he going to learn the opposite if it's not in church?
We've got a ministry even to those you see who are not, quote, in line.
What we see happening between Paul and the Corinthians is a tale as old as time. An emerging movement, a change in the thoughts and minds of a community is underway. Paul is leading the way toward a better way to live among other people. Sure, some of his ideas don't stand the test of time, but I do think that it is important from time to time for us to remember that even progressive leaders are people of the time and place in which they live. They're not immune to the faults of their generation. And sometimes we actually get to see them transform through their shortcomings and into an even stronger unifying leader. Paul left his second visit to Corinth on very bad terms. He felt hurt, and the Corinthian Christians also felt hurt. As he explains in chapter 2, he didn't want to make matters worse by showing up again while the community was already upset with him. And there were other Gentile leaders who were ready to swoop in and take his place should he lose the confidence of the community entirely. As Paul waited for Titus to return with his report concerning the impact of his tearful letter, his mind could not rest due to his anxiety over the Corinthian situation. So Paul left Troas to find Titus, and when he did, Titus gave Paul the good news that this letter had indeed won back the majority of the Corinthians. Moreover, because the church had responded so positively, Paul could now plan to visit them once again.
I have done as much as I know how to do, unless you can tell me some other things I can do, to change. I have gone to groups and I've tried to change them. I've tried with my own friends. I've tried with friends in other states. I have spoken before the state legislature. I have gone everywhere I've been asked to go to try to explain or interpret or do anything. I got laughed at by some. I got cold-shouldered by others. I got sneered at by others. I have not been spoken to by many people for years, and personally, I don't give a damn. But I'm simply telling you that's the way it is in Omaha, and that's the way it is in every place in this United States.
And the reason you have so much frustration is that your own white people will not listen to you. And this just bears out what we say. How long?
On May 9th, 1961, the bus carrying young John Lewis pulled into the Rock Hill, South Carolina stop as scheduled. Mr. Lewis and his seatmate, a white man named Albert Bigelow, stepped off the bus and headed into the station, which was designated whites only. Almost immediately, the two men were approached by KKK supporter Elwyn Wilson, who proceeded to beat them, leaving them broken and bloody. In staying true to their nonviolent approach to protest, Lewis and Bigelow refused even to press charges against Wilson, hoping instead that the incident would help to further illustrate to the nation that systemic change needed to happen in order to free us all from the chains of racism.
Isn't it?
And I think that most ministers are too afraid.
There are more.
But there are some.
There are some, but they're not enough. I mean, I don't see how a minister.
Well, it's really the church's fault because they know if they do speak out, they're liable to lose their job.
But the minister is pledged to preach the word of God, and if he doesn't do it, I mean, then why is he a minister?
Well, you've got to look at it as economic standpoint.
But
because if he speaks out for what he believes, and the church doesn't believe it, he's going to be out.
So he should compromise everything he believes and everything that Christ taught because.
Well, I don't want to lose those people in my church. I don't want to have a church anymore.
You said that I shouldn't compromise.
Well, I'm saying that's what.
All right, but then when I said that I didn't see how you could betray someone's race, and you'd say I'd be compromising my race or something, well, then what's the difference? I mean, if the minister who's gone to seminary and everything, and he's pledged to teach the word of Christ to his congregation, I mean, if he's too afraid to stand up and do it, I mean, how can he call himself a minister?
He can't. I'm agreeing with you. He's betraying his congregation then. He's betraying himself. He's betraying God.
These video clips that I've been playing throughout my sermon come from the 1966 documentary, A Time for Burning, commissioned by the Lutheran Church in America to follow the then minister of Augustana Lutheran Church in Omaha, Nebraska, as he attempts to persuade his all-white congregation to be in communion with the all-black Lutheran Church 3 blocks away. He's not trying to integrate the churches. He's only suggesting that couples from his church spend an evening with couples from the other church to begin to build relationships that would allow the 2 churches to work together to better serve their neighborhood. The clip that we just saw was a group of teenagers speaking truth to the situation. If the minister is too afraid to stand up, she says, and teach the words of Christ to the congregation, how can he call himself a minister? Indeed, how? We see in the first few chapters of 2 Corinthians that Paul was not afraid to call himself and the Corinthian community out for forgetting themselves. As Pastor Stacy showed us last week, Paul began by naming his own pain and hurt. He didn't blame it on anyone, but he allowed his feelings to be heard. And then he admits his own faults and asks for the community's forgiveness. Verse 5 says, "If anyone has caused pain, he has caused it not to me, but to some extent, not to exaggerate it, to all of you." In other words, you, the Christian community of Corinth, have suffered emotional pain because we had a disagreement. And then in verse 7, "So now, instead, you should forgive and console him, so that he may not be overwhelmed by excessive sorrow." Perhaps not as delicate as I might have worded a plea for forgiveness, but a plea for forgiveness nonetheless. Paul has proven here that he and the church community that he is trying to cultivate is not above being wrong. And when it is determined that he was wrong, he will apologize in his own way.
I'm sorry for what happened down there.
Well, it's okay. It's all right. It's almost 48 years ago.
That's right.
Yeah. So remember that day well?
I try to get it out of my mind.
Mm-hmm.
That was Mr. Wilson and Congressman Lewis in 2009, 48 years after the incident at the Rock Hill bus depot. Wilson said that his role in the racist actions of his community had weighed on him heavily, and he spent the last several years of his life apologizing to those whom he hurt. Without batting an eye, Congressman Lewis accepted his apology and forgave him. "It's okay. I forgive you," he said. "It's in keeping with the philosophy of nonviolence," he later told an interviewer for the New York Times. That's what the movement was always about, to have the capacity to forgive and move toward reconciliation.
Little did I dream 1 week ago that I would resign as pastor of Augustana Lutheran Church. I was told that a group of members wanted a change of pastor. They indicated that this was not a case of liking or disliking the pastor. The word mismatch was used.
Happy New Year, Judy.
I was told that people were staying away from church because they do not want to hear what I am saying.
Okay, you're going to make it, though. Oh, yeah. Happy New Year, Jack.
The conclusion is that the gospel as they conceive it was not being preached. As I resign as pastor of Augustana, let me confess again my faith in a God who calls men to be in a company of the committed. That our obedience is to the Christ who stands, as always, in the hectic confusion of the marketplaces of the world. That our ministry is centered.
Paul would never be accused of only saying things that were easy to say, even if the hard thing to say was, "I'm sorry." The former pastor of Augustana Lutheran Church was unwilling to stop challenging his congregation to be better, and he lost because of it. Today, I want to make a vow to you, as a church who's supporting me, that I too plan to be the kind of pastor who refuses to shy away from saying the hard thing. And I'd like to start today. In June of 2017, the city of Philadelphia made headlines among the queer community when they added a black and brown stripe to the rainbow flag. This was done in an effort to begin to mend the queer community that was fractured along racial lines. This is often a problem that goes unseen or ignored because so often progress for white LGBTQ+ people does result in some progress for non-white LGBTQ+ people too. However, implicit bias and systemic racism is a real problem that goes unanswered because everyone in the community has experienced oppression and can hide behind it. What was intended to be a change for Philadelphia quickly started gaining popularity across the country, and my reaction to it was not good. Black lives matter every day, I said, not just in the privacy of my home, but publicly on Facebook for the world to see. I said, I'm happy to stand up for that cause, but my oppression matters too, and you can't take that away from me. I was unable to see my own privilege, my own bias, my own power among this group of also oppressed people because of the color of my skin. No one was taking anything away from me. They were confronting me with my own racism, and it made me uncomfortable. We must confront ourselves and our history, our own faults, and the ways in which we have allowed ourselves to step on others for our own comfort. We must be better. The heroes of our past are dying, and now it's up to us to make ourselves better, to make our church better, and to make the world better. We can only do that by noticing and admitting when we were wrong. Apologize for it. And this next step is the most important. Allow ourselves to be forgiven. If anyone has caused pain, he has caused it not to me, but to some extent, not to exaggerate it, to all of you. This punishment by the majority is enough for such a person. So now, instead, you should forgive and console him so that he may not be overwhelmed by excessive sorrow. In response to Wilson's apology, Congressman Lewis said, "I never thought this would happen. It says something about the power of love, of grace, the power of the people being able to say, 'I'm sorry,' and move on. And I deeply appreciate it. It's very meaningful to me." My words 3 years ago were wrong-headed and racist, and I am sorry. I see now how my white privilege blinded me to the broader issue of a racial injustice within my own community, and my own experience of oppression is not an excuse for me to dismiss it. I can't promise that I will never do it again. None of us can. That's the problem with systemic racism. It can be hard to see our own biases. But we must try every day to be a little bit better than we were the day before. May it be so. You're not coming through.
I've heard it said that people come into our lives for a reason, bringing something we must learn, and we are led to those who help us most to grow if we let them, and we help them in return. Well, I don't know if I believe that's true, but I know I'm who I am today because I knew you. Like a comet pulled from orbit as it passes a sun, like a stream that meets a boulder halfway through the wood. Who can say if I've been changed for the better? But because I knew you, I have been changed for good.
It well may be that we will never meet again in this lifetime. So let me say before we part, so much of me is made from what I've learned from you. You'll be on my heart. And now, whatever way our stories end, I know you have rewritten mine by being my friend. Like a ship blown from its mooring by a wind off the sea, like a seed that dropped by a sky bird in a distant wood. Who can say if I've been changed for the better? But because I knew you,
because I knew you,
I have been changed for good. And just to clear the air, I ask forgiveness for the things I've done you blame me for.
and yet I guess we know there's blame to share,
And none of it seems to matter anymore.
like a comet falls from orbit, like a stream that meets a boulder halfway through the wood. Who can say if I've been changed for the better? I do believe I have been changed for the better. And because I knew you,